There is a plant so dangerous that 70% of American suburbs will fine you for growing it. Homeowners associations call it an eyesore. Lawn care companies call it an invasion. Your neighbor might report you for letting it spread. But here is what they will not tell you. This plant contains more protein than spinach, more vitamin C than you would expect from something growing between sidewalk cracks. And in laboratory conditions, it outperformed a prescription diabetes medication. Not matched it. Beat it. By a factor of 2. It kept entire nations alive during famines. It fed livestock when nothing else would grow. For 80 years, seed companies sold it on purpose because it made lawns healthier. Then something changed. In 1945, the war ended. And the chemical industry needed a new enemy. They found one, growing in your front yard. This is the story of white clover. The plant that was declared a weed not because it was harmful, but because it was too useful, too free, too difficult to monetize. And the weapon they used to kill it was originally designed to starve nations. The archive opens in Europe, centuries ago, before chemical companies, before suburban lawns, before anyone thought to call clover ugly. They called it famine bread. When the crops failed, clover remained. When drought scorched the wheat, clover pushed through. When families had nothing left, they ground the flowers and leaves into flour. They survived on what grew wild and refused to die. In Ireland, during the darkest years of hunger, clover was a lifeline, not a luxury, a necessity. Native American tribes understood this too. They used white clover as medicine. They brewed it into teas for fevers and inflammation. They recognized what modern science would take centuries to confirm. This small plant with the 3-lobed leaves held power far beyond its humble appearance. Now, fast forward to America, the early 20th century. The suburbs are expanding. Lawns are becoming status symbols, and every major seed company in the country is selling white clover on purpose. Scott's, the biggest name in lawn care. They included clover in their grass seed mixes for 80 years, not as a contaminant, as a feature. Why? Because clover does something almost miraculous. It pulls nitrogen from the air and fixes it into the soil. It feeds the grass around it. It creates its own fertilizer out of nothing but atmosphere and root systems. A lawn with clover was a lawn that fed itself. This was common knowledge, accepted science, good practice, until 1945. The year is 1941. The world is at war. And in laboratories across America, chemists are working on a new kind of weapon. Not a bomb, not a bullet, a plant killer. The compound was called 2,4-dichlorophenoxyacetic acid, and it was known as 2,4-D for short. Its purpose was biological warfare. The plan was simple and devastating. Spray it over enemy farmland, watch their crops wither, starve entire nations into surrender. Germany, Japan. Their food supplies would collapse, their populations would weaken. Victory through famine. But the weapon was never deployed. The war ended before the chemical saw combat. Now there was a problem. Chemical companies had invested millions. They had built factories, stockpiled product, trained workers. And suddenly, there was no war to fight. They couldn't sell chemical weapons to the American public. So they rebranded. In 1945, the same compound meant to destroy enemy agriculture hit store shelves with a friendly new name: Weed-B-Gon. The language of warfare became the language of lawn care. The target shifted from foreign crops to domestic plants. But 2,4-D had a side effect. It killed clover. And this created a crisis for the industry. For decades, seed companies had sold clover as a benefit, a natural fertilizer, a sign of a healthy lawn. Now they were selling a chemical that destroyed it. They could not sell both. So they made a choice. A calculated, profitable choice. They stopped selling clover. They removed it from their seed mixes. And then came the genius stroke of corporate manipulation. They convinced America that clover was ugly. Marketing campaigns reframed the narrative. Advertising painted the three-leaf plant as an invader, something unclean, something that ruined the perfect green carpet every homeowner was supposed to want. The plant that had fed Europe during famines became a weed overnight. Not because anything changed about clover, because everything changed about profit. The year is 2018. Researchers decide to test white clover against a standard diabetes medication called acarbose. Acarbose works by inhibiting an enzyme called alpha amylase. This enzyme breaks down carbohydrates into sugar. Block it, and you slow the blood sugar spike after meals. Simple mechanism. Effective drug. Expensive prescription. The researchers extracted compounds from white clover. They ran the same tests. The results were not subtle. Acarbose required 50 micrograms to achieve its effect. White clover extract needed only 25 micrograms. In pharmacology, lower is better. Lower means more potent, more efficient. The outlawed lawn flower was twice as effective as the pharmaceutical. This isn't folk medicine. This isn't wishful thinking. This is peer-reviewed research. Measurable, repeatable, published. A plant you can be fined for growing outperforms a drug you need a prescription to buy. But the science goes deeper than blood sugar. Remember that nitrogen trick? The one that made clover valuable for 80 years before the chemical companies needed it gone? A healthy clover lawn produces 150 pounds of nitrogen per acre every single year, pulled from thin air, deposited into the soil, free. The commercial value of that nitrogen is $90 per acre annually. Exposed to sunlight and rain and time, clover does what fertilizer factories do. Without the factories, without the emissions, without the invoice. The synthetic fertilizer industry generates $120 billion in revenue. Their entire business model depends on soil that cannot feed itself. Clover breaks that model. It always has. That's why it had to become a weed. A perfectly green lawn, uniform, immaculate, not a single clover in sight. That's not a sign of health. That's a crime scene, not a crime of nature, a crime of marketing, a crime of profit over biology, a crime that stretches back to weapons laboratories and wartime stockpiles and corporate boardrooms where someone decided your health was less important than their revenue. They took a chemical designed to starve enemy nations and sprayed it on your front yard. They took a plant that could feed your family during crisis and convinced you it was trash. They built a $100 billion industry on the lie that soil needs their product when nature already provided the solution. White clover is not a weed. It's a survivor they tried to erase. A medicine they couldn't patent. A fertilizer they couldn't sell. Every time you spray your lawn, you're poisoning something older than corporations. Something that kept your ancestors alive. Something that still outperforms their pharmaceuticals in laboratory conditions. The absurdity is almost too heavy to hold. You can be fined for growing a plant that fixes nitrogen for free. You can be shamed for nurturing a flower that regulates blood sugar better than prescription drugs. You can be called negligent for letting nature do what nature has done for millennia. This is what they stole from us. Not just a plant, a relationship with the land. A trust in what grows without permission. The clover is still there, waiting at the edges, pushing through the cracks, refusing to disappear no matter how much poison we pour. Maybe it's time we let it back. If this story changed how you see your lawn, don't let it stop with you. Share it with someone still buying the lie. Let them know what's actually growing beneath the chemicals. Because the best rebellion does not require a protest sign. Sometimes it just requires letting the clover bloom.